Good morning all. I think we're online now, are we? Yeah, thank you. So, welcome. And welcome to our online participants as well. Are there any urgent items or announcements? No, thank you. Items considered, absence of public and press, no. Declarations of interest by members. Paul first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just for information, I have been appointed as a treasurer to two charitable organisations. I don't believe there are any conflicts of interest. They're declared on my interest sheet. But if there were, I would certainly withdraw at the time. One's to do with a charitable foundation that promotes public transport, and the other treasurership is with the Healy Trust in Sheffield.
Thank you very much. And Dave.
Thank you, Chair. There's an item on Treasury Management later on. There's some reference to funds from 10 years ago which were managed by Sheffield City Council. I was Head of Strategic Finance then, so I was in overall charge of Treasury Management at Sheffield at the time. So I'll keep my nose out of any bits of that item.
That's duly noted, thank you. Reports from questions by members? No. Questions from members of the public? No. Be done in 10 minutes. Minutes and actions of the previous meeting held 4th of December. Any questions, points? No. Thank you very much. Health and safety update, Sean.
Yeah, morning everybody. No accidents or incidents to report during the last period. Any notes? So accidents and incidents for interchanges then. The figures have shown a slight decrease compared to the last reporting period, which is good, but with the primary contributors being Barnsley and Doncaster, and Sheffield showing a decrease. We had a total of 334 accidents and incidents reported during 2025 for the year. We have had no RIDOs for Simca to report during the last reporting period, again, which is good. Crime and disorder figures, there have been a total of 560 crime and disorder incidents reported during last year of 2025, with the majority of these being contributed to antisocial behaviour. October to December had 110 reports, which shows a large decrease compared to October-December of 24. Where we had 161 reports there. So again, that's going in the right direction. Vandalism. That's been a slight overall increase in vandalism reported during October to December, and in the period October to December there have been a total of 236 reports of damage to bus stops and shelters. I'm assured that all work orders have been raised to get them repaired. Antisocial behaviour. Overall, the number of reported antisocial behaviour incidents has increased during this reporting period from 56 July to September to 80 during October to December. We believe it's due to the change in weather and a notable increase in people congregating within the interchanges, with Doncaster showing the biggest increase during that time. That's got looked into by, we've asked Noonans to look into that and see what's going on, but again we believe it's changing weather conditions. Overall, the overall investment in deploying the mobile operatives and enhanced police presence throughout this period to monitor and engage with public appears to be delivering positive results, so again that's a good step moving forward. Transport operator, Siftel, we'll let Chris speak about his side.
Yeah, we've had around 5 RIDOs which basically relate to minor RTCs when a tram's struck a vehicle, usually because the vehicle's, well in all cases actually, the vehicle's paid attention to the signal and started to pass. And the tram unfortunately can't stop in time enough to, not make contact with the vehicle. Interestingly enough, one of those particular incidents relates to an undercover police car, which wasn't under emergency conditions at the time, but just chose to jump the lights anyway. So that's a few bits on that. In relation to the fatality that we spoke of at the last meeting, there's no update on that at this present time, other than the fact that it's now with the coroner to make a decision on whether or not it was suicide or not. So the tram's been fully investigated. The braking systems are fine. The driver did everything the driver could do. The driver's fully now back into work and driving trams again. And there's perceived to be no wrongdoing on behalf of the tram. And it's with the coroner to make that decision on whether or not he or she feels it's a suicidal event.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, I think we should be pleased that the driver's back in action, because that can be a very traumatic experience. So well done on that. Just a couple of points. In Barnsley, the situation in the bus centre might be mitigated somewhat by the fact that the big youth centre next to that is currently open, and I understand that there are going to be youth workers in the interchange as well. So we'll watch that with interest, see what effect, if any, that does have. And the other one on bus shelters. Often when I see them, they're glass and almost inviting vandalism. Has there been any consideration of target hardening on that?
I think new designs are being currently looked at, aren't they, for bus shelters and things like that. I think it's, as far as I'm aware.
So, Chair, we do monitor vandalism against bus shelters. I mean, there is, I guess, an escalation in design, so we can move from glass to perspex screens, and then from perspex screens through to metal ones. I think there are issues about using metal screens, not least because they're not popular with the public, and people prefer a glass screen both for their own safety, in that they can be seen both by the public and the bus driver, and that they can see out to the road. So we choose where possible to use glass, but there is an escalation process. So there are shelters out there where we've started with glass but moved to metal at a point in the future, as we've noted that there is a project underway now just to look at the sort of provision of bus shelters into the future. We recognise that they're not great in all parts of the region, and the Mayor has a commitment to improving bus infrastructure. So that project is looking at design principles that's engaging with the public on what they would like to see, and that's involving both practitioners but design professionals and the wider public to get a more informed view on what the art of the possible looks like.
Okay, yeah, perhaps if we could move to unbreakable glass, if that wasn't too expensive.
Bulletproof glass.
Well, yeah. Something of that standard. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that report. As ever, it's very useful and interesting. I've got one well done to start off with. I noted on it on page 31, all the fire risk assessments are up to date, which is good, because they weren't.
They're currently under. The next round's currently underway as we speak, so that they are up to date. Yeah.
Good, because we were lagging on some of them a couple of years ago, but we're now up to date now. So thank you very much for that. And then I'll whiz them all out, and if you can then come back to me. Just on page 33, there's a lot more trips at Barnsley interchange than everywhere else. I just wondered if is there some sort of design feature in Barnsley that makes that interchange particularly dangerous, or is it just a very random thing? We had a lot of people just hurl themselves over the stairs in Barnsley this time. Or if you look at it, it's a very tall skyscraper at 24 compared to the next biggest at 7. So that's one question. If I whiz down, I'm going to then go through the report, and then the Riddle report again, which is very interesting. You've covered the fatality, thank you. Then on the top of page 38, you'd got a comment, driver initially misread the signal as showing a bar aspect stop. Upon realising the signal was not at stop, the driver slowed the tram. I would have thought if he thought it was at stop, he would have already been stopping and then starting, rather than if he read it at a stop, slowing. So that just confused me. So if you could just explain. Down near the bottom, there's one about a CCTV not being displayed in sufficient time. CCTV showing that signal was not displayed in sufficient time for the driver to stop safely at the signal. That feels a bit like a near miss. Have we looked at that to make sure that we are displaying signals in time for drivers to stop? Nothing happened on that one there, but it does feel a bit worrying. The police car, I assume we're passing that on to police authority or police to have a look at why their people are whizzing around in unmarked police cars and not and going through lights. That is. And the final one is, sorry, is it possible to have a bit of a trend analysis of how many RIDDOR incidents we have each time? Your RIDDOR report's very useful. It'd be useful to see whether that's a typical number of RIDDORs for this quarter, or whether we should be expecting 10 and we've got it down to 5, whether we should be expecting 2 and it's gone up to 5. So I will stop talking there.
Yeah, we can do that, not a problem. We can. It's always good to identify if we're on an improving trend or a declining trend. In relation to the 2 incidents you mentioned, my understanding of it is, however it's been written, that the signal changed quite quickly and didn't give the tram operator a chance to, or it already started to pass at the time the signals were changed. So it does bode the question, is exactly what you just raised there, is are the signals being operated in a way that they're giving the drivers a chance to stop? So that is something that I'll take back to Supertram and look at the OCC and see what measures they've got in place, because it's difficult to stop a tram, and when you're on a green and as you're passing through it gets a red, it's it's one of those. So yeah, of course, yeah.
Sorry, just on that point, how are the signals controlled? Are they manual, or are they controlled through the traffic light signals for the road users?
They're controlled through automatic traffic light systems, as I understand, and it's something that we're down to replace across the network. So on something that Patrick's provided me with is signal heads, which is he said is features as important part of this meeting. We're due to replace all of the signal heads, which are automated systems. So generally the tram will always be given priority to the cars and anything else on the road. But obviously, if the traffic lights are on green and cars are passing, they don't immediately stop. But in a general basis, it's an automated system, and the tram is always given priority.
Fine, because we discussed this at Transport Risk Working Group. The point about the signalling time that you've got didn't come up. But if we're saying that the signals are switching back to stop, and unless you instructed drivers to drive extremely carefully, and this one was 17.5 miles an hour, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Unless they're going to crawl past at 5.
Yeah.
Unless we go across the system and reassess the risk there.
Yeah.
We're always going to be having signals past a bar if it switches back that fast.
Yeah.
So that's underway, is it?
Yeah.
Tilted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we are around 70 to 80% of changing all those signal heads. So we're getting on very well with that.
And if I could just come in on the question raised about Barnsley interchange, so we've picked up on the increases in numbers of slip trips and falls at the interchange. I've commissioned the commercial director to do a piece of work exploring that. Early indications are we're mindful that there is a capital programme to replace the roof, so there are leaks at the roof, but the biggest cluster of instances around changes in step levels, so around the steps, escalators, ramps and platforms, but also around the entrances. So he will report back, and we're happy to report back to the committee on his findings. But in terms of the next steps and interim arrangements, so we're going to implement targeted joint safety inspections at those identified hotspots. We're also going to do a risk assessment of all the entrance mats and floor finishers to try and understand whether there's any change in specification that's required around those. We're also going to map across the roof leak areas so that we can plan the capital programme accordingly, and then we're also reviewing and increasing cleaning schedules and reviewing spot cleaning protocols, and they're going to review the accident and incident reporting to include map-based reporting, so that we've got a really clear identification at reporting stage of where these hotspots are, so that we can look to manage and mitigate that whilst we work through the capital programme and any changes that we need to make to the matting specifications.
Okay, thank you for that. I mentioned this item last time, and I can inform you it hasn't got better. I've nearly broke my neck several times on that surface. It really does need something doing to it fairly urgently, and for all I know, the others as well. But certainly Barnsley does. Yes.
Thank you. While we're on trams, and I want to pick up again on the various issues with the signalling. So the outstanding section that needs new signal heads is the Shellsmore out to Middlewood and Mayoral Bridge, and a lot of the traffic lights there are under refurbishment as well at the same time. Now we understand, I mean, quite a lot of these signals have got a lot of bolts missing, and they aren't being replaced, one presumes, because we're waiting for the LED units to be fitted. And there are issues at Hillsborough Corner with the whole automation of the tram system. One issue which did come up was we were told that one of the crossings there that has not had a signalling head on it because it has never worked, and the drivers rely on the traffic signals and not the signal heads at that particular crossing. Will that be resolved? Because in the spring,
Yes.
we're supposed to be completely upgrading that.
Yeah, we've got a total of 60 to do in total, and we've got 18 remaining to do on the network. So it is a priority, and like you say, they're changing from filament lamps to LEDs because we know bulbs pop quite easily, and the new LED technology pretty much is there to stay, and it's a lot more effective, a lot more visible. So we're on with that in terms of getting those replacements done as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Chair. When was the last time we did a risk assessment then on the signalling system?
So what they do is they don't necessarily do risk assessments on the signalling system. They do whole route risk assessments where they drive the route and the whole entire route, including the signals, is risk assessed on a regular basis. I think annually, and then any subject to that. Changes are made. So, for example, if we take the unfortunate lady who got hit by the tram, if you remember a while back, we've identified there that there's a lack of measures in place to prevent people from crossing at points they shouldn't cross. So we're in the process of commissioning the design to put some chicanes in, and you know, you come down from a blind bend, and then there's some cobbles. We think the lady fell over and actually hit her head on the cobbles, so we're bringing in a designer, and then on the other side of the road is a hill that comes straight down the road straight down, and then completely meets the tram. So all it takes is a cyclist or someone on one of these scooters to be coming down there fast at the same time as a tram, and we're in a world of trouble. So we're putting in chicanes and measures to slow people down and stop people and just make them pause before they cross.
No, I think that's a great idea for the user interface with the tram system. I just wondered, perhaps we could have at the next Transport and Risk Working Group a more in-depth look at signalling, please.
Okay.
Because if we've got a problem where drivers are permitted to go at a speed which we think the signal is going to switch back to stop, because presumably there's a danger because there's traffic crossing or whatever, then that seems to be an inherent risk in what we're running. We're almost planning to fail through that. So if we can look into that at the next one, and obviously if you think it needs doing before then, that's fine. But I think that'd be helpful for us to get to the grips with signalling.
Yeah. I mean, it's similar to a traffic light when it's on green. So when it's on green, it's going to change to amber. You've got the choice whether to stop or to try and make it across. And but I understand with the tram system, it's a lot more difficult to stop. So we need to be giving the trams a bit more of a fighting chance to make sure that they're coming to a stop correctly. Which I will take back to Supertram.
Thank you.
No problem.
And just another point about Barnsley, I think actually when we've discussed it before, that interchange, and this goes back to Tim Taylor's time when he used to come to this group, I think it was to do with the surface, the tiled surface, which is susceptible to rain like it is nowadays, and it was all around the railway station, the bus station area. That was the particular problem that we looked at before. And one final point from me, please, and possibly to prove that we do read the report, Sean. On page 30, just so I'm looking at the right, I know I'm looking at the right numbers. There's no doubt that vandalism's coming down, but there's a comment under vandalism, the heading. It says that it's an increase of 0.1%. Is that a typo? And that should be 10%. Fine, that's fine. But that proves that we do read your reports. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your answers earlier. I think one that I know I asked 5 or 6 questions, always runs the risk that we don't quite pick them all up. Just the point about making sure the unmarked police car is picked up with the police authority. Can you confirm it will be? And I'll drop the one at the slightly confusing word at the top of page 38 because we've done it's a signalling thing. We've done that to death. So
just on the police car incident, I spoke to my head of light rail about that, because at the end of the day we're all road users and we're all subject to the same rules and requirements. And if it's an emergency situation, I completely understand it, but it's not acceptable. So I don't believe at this moment that's being taken back to the police. So is this the forum where somebody would contact the police with the power in this forum to say or is it you? What are you asking me to do? Are you asking me to take that back? Or
I was just asking whether it had been taken back to police. I'm not asking you to do it.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't.
Treasurer's going to come in here.
Yeah, we'll raise the matter with our police and crime colleagues who will be able to liaise with South Yorkshire Police.
Thank you.
I've just noticed one other note I got there. On page 41, in terms of the Siftal incidents, there's one in the middle of the table that's called separation. Is that when the tram cars come apart? What is that?
Yeah. The tram should become. Sorry. Yes. Yeah, that's the separation. So basically the tram's not connected correctly, and it's just the two have come and would have been rejoined to one another.
And could that have happened in traffic when it was carrying passengers?
I believe that happened in the depot. So yeah. It's these things are all checked at the depot, and it's before it goes out the depot. So it would have just been missed and then picked up prior to it leaving the depot.
Thank you.
No worries.
But could that have happened while it was underway?
Not generally, because the trams are prepped, so that they go through quite a rigorous process of checking prior to them leaving the depot, and then once it's all been done, the trams display a sign saying tram fully prepped at the top of the tram. So it may have just been a tram that hadn't been quite fully finished. Someone's decided to move it, and the other part's not connected. So no, not generally. It's not something that we would expect ever to happen on the public highway.
And if it did, do the brakes come on automatically when it separates?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Hang on, just press the button first. We should have big mics in the middle of the table. Right, thank you very much for that comprehensive report and for answers to your questions. Thank you very much. And on to item 9, which is Ian.
Hi. So this is the update on the 24-25 statement of accounts. So currently we're just doing the final adjustments to the statement of accounts and sharing those with KPMG for approval. The expectation is that they will agree those adjustments next week, and that we'll receive a early draft ISA 260 next week. In terms of timelines, the accounts have to be submitted to MCA board on the 19th of February, and papers have to be published for that board on the 11th of February. So there won't be time for audit committee to sort of do a full review of the accounts before they need submitting to MCA board. So the proposal is that we delegate the review of the 24-25 statements of accounts and draft ISA 260 to the chair and vice chair of the Audit Standards and Risk Committee in order to get that sort of reviewed before the MCA board meeting.
Sorry, there may be a logistic problem here in that from the end of next week I'm off away for 2 weeks.
Right.
And completely non-contactable. So either they've got to come before the end of next week, or I'm potentially looking around at least one colleague who I think would be happy to do in my place.
I'll see what I can have by the end of next week. We should have a statement of accounts with all the adjustments done by the end of next week. We may have an early draft ISA 260.
End of next week is no good. I'm off
Right.
from.
Okay. Well, so can
we might need to say that contingency, I think, is
right. Okay.
Are you content to do that, Paul?
Yep, very content with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay. In terms of adjustments to the accounts, the only adjustment that's going to affect the outturn position is the adjustment relating to SIFTL accruals, where SIFTL had over-accrued some expenditure. The figure on that has been agreed at 357,000, so that basically will just improve the Simca's outturn position by 357,000, and then that ends up in the Tram Resilience Reserve. And then on SIFTL's accounts, their expenditure reduces and their subsidy reduces to match it off. So it has a net zero effect on SIFTL's accounts. Any other adjustments don't affect the outturn position. And in terms of the audit opinion, the expectation at the moment is there'll be a disclaimed audit opinion, and this is not related to anything to do with 24-25 accounts. This is just while KPMG do the sort of building back assurance exercise for previous years when there wasn't a full audit completed on the accounts.
Sorry, so they're not able to give any assurance at all on the figures, even though I absolutely appreciate the previous year's figures weren't audited completely, and hence all the opening balances we've got no assurance over them. They've not been able to build back any assurance over our.
I can hand you over to. I can hand you over to James to answer that. If that would be. Are you okay to answer that, James?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that. So, yeah, basically where we're at is our anticipation, and it's always been the plan for 24-25, was to complete the risk assessment aspect of the building back assurance work in line with the LARIGs. with the idea of then determining the level of work that would be required to be done within 25, 26 to be able to remove that disclaimer, and that's still the plan. You may be aware that on the 15th of December, SGN 05 was released by the NAO around the reporting of audit opinions relating to statutory accounts within this space. And that currently our Department of Professional Practice has come up with some guidelines that we now need to follow through in order to determine whether a disclaimer is still the most appropriate opinion or whether a qualified opinion can be given instead on the financial statements, which is a one-step up improvement year on year. The crux of the work that we have to do on that is determine the level of work that we've been able to do over the closing balances in 24-25, and obviously we're pleased to say that we'll have completed a full audit over the 24-25 statements. The second part then is to work through a number of factors in order to determine whether we consider reserves to be fundamental to the users of the accounts. And the focus on the reserves is really down to the fact that that is the aspect of the accounts that we don't have assurance over at this stage. And there are a number of factors that we need to work through and then work through with our risk team in order to determine whether our conclusion around how fundamental reserves are due to the 1 year of unaudited accounts are and the movements associated with those. So there are some machinations we need to work through in order to determine where we end up. The idea centrally from a call that we were on as part of a benchmarking exercise is it's felt that the majority of people will end up on the side of the fence that the reserves and reserves movements that are unaudited are fundamental to the users of the accounts, but there is a circumstance in which the opinion could end up being qualified, and then in 25, 26 we work to fully remove any qualification or disclaimer to have a clean opinion in next year's set of accounts.
I was going to say, thanks, James. Are we, I get that not having audited opening balances for your reserves and hence not being able to really do the movements in year are both severe difficulties for you. Are we happy that the reserve position as shown at the year end is materially correct though? Because that's the most important thing for us now, that we know where we are in terms of how much we've got.
Yeah, so obviously from being able to complete a full audit in 23-24 and 2024-25, everything that's happened in those 2 years, we're happy that things are materially correct. Obviously, any movement between 23-24 remains the part that we need to build back assurance on and provide that opinion on as part of our work that we're going to do in 25-26, and that's the reason for the disclaimer. But in terms of any issues with the previous 2 years' financial statements, there have been no issues from a material point of view that will impact the opinion, and the disclaimer specifically relates to that 1 year that remained unaudited by the predecessor auditors.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may just sum up for other members of the committee, because I appreciate this is a super complicated issue. I think, and James, team, please do jump in if I summarise this wrong. We have a legacy issue here that we're still unwinding, and that relates to the disruption in the national audit processes that led to disclaimers dating back to 23-24. I think the assumption was always that it would take a number of audits, James, to build back the assurance to get us back on track, and that is simply that you have inherited a set of accounts over which you had not performed the previous audits, and those audits hadn't been performed by predecessor bodies, which was EY at that point in time. So what we were looking for is to build us back as much assurance as possible in the 24-25 accounts, but aim for 25-26 as the point at which we would be ultimately back on track. And I think the assurance I've received in this process is the accounts we've presented to you on time for 24-25 have been audited, and that the only adjustment that we are required to make that would affect our general fund balance is a correction to the accounts of Sheffield that has a flow-through impact for us because it reduces the amount of subsidy that we need to provide to the company. So all in at this point, that is a good news story, albeit there is still work to do to provide you with the confidence you require and the balances you inherited, and that will happen in the forthcoming audit for 25-26. Is that a fair reflection?
Yeah, absolutely, Gareth. And I think it's worth saying that obviously being able to complete full audits in 23, 24, and 24, 25 has begun to build back significant assurance within the financial statements and the process in general. As you say, there is a good news story with regards to the level of work completed and the findings to date. And actually, so far, and the finance team can attest, we have already, we're actually largely through the risk assessment phase of the building back assurance, which then lets us determine how much work is required during the forthcoming period. So if we can get that done before the end of February, we can actually probably focus on doing some of that build back assurance substantive work as part of the planning and risk assessment, and hopefully have an update on that towards the sort of the summertime in terms of being able to say at that stage, so long as we're happy with the 25-26 accounts, we will be able to remove that disclaimer based on the work that we'll be able to do over the forthcoming months as well. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to front load that work now once we're in a position to sign off the 24-25 statement. So it isn't going to be a case of mid-January next year where we're still umming and ahhing over whether that disclaimer can be removed. We should have that answer to you partway through the year this year.
For those who understand that, I'm very pleased. Okay, so the recommendation is that we are asked to delegate the review of that 24/5 statement of accounts to effectively Paul as standing vice chair and myself. Are we content to do that? Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for your report here. So moving on to item 10, internal audit report.
Thank you, Chair. So the first report we have is our progress report. This provides committee with an update in terms of the internal audit activity since the last audit committee. We have two reports which we've finalised, which are next on the agenda in terms of GDPR and financial management, looking at Treasury. We have a couple of audits which are in draft or underway, including digital strategy, data quality and Sheffield health and safety. They are all scheduled for the March audit committee. And then we have 3 more internal audits planned for the remainder of 25-26. We have kind of one for each month going forward. So in terms of the delivery, it's all planned and scheduled, and I'm confident we're going to get through it by the end of the year. I'll just pause there really in terms of the progress of 25-26, if committee has any questions on that, before I move on to the next part of the progress report. That's okay. Okay, so on page 54, we have an initial draft list of potential areas for the 26-27 internal audit plan. Now, how we've formulated this list so far is by having initial conversations with management. We've looked at previous assurance reviews and internal audits to look at where we've looked at areas in the past, if there's any areas of non-compliance or negative assurance, whether that needs to be considered. We've looked at external risks such as cybersecurity, and when we last did that, we've also not linked it back yet, but we have obviously looked at the corporate risk register to see what the top risks are, what the high risks are, and where we could provide some assurance to committee. So here is our very initial kind of list for areas for next year. The next plan after this audit committee, just so you've got the full process, is we're going to meet with ELB at the February forum to kind of discuss with management at that open forum in terms of the right risk areas and what we may look at to kind of add value in those areas. But really it was just to see whether there's anything that as a committee you have concerns with, areas that you think you need assurance which we don't have in this list, that we may need to consider going forward. Some of the areas, for example, the titles are to be determined yet, but workforce planning / business planning / contingency arrangements are linked back to the capacity risk on the risk register. But it was really just to ask committee whether there's anything at this stage that you want to see on the plan for next year. I'll just pause there.
Yes, thank you. I noticed that you've got, under SIFTL, you've got absence management and you've got staff well-being. How is all this linked in with staff turnover? And is these some of the areas which are causing issues with SIFTL?
I'll take that if that's okay, Anna. So it's absolutely linked to that. So you'll be aware, Councillor, there's been disruption on the network of late, in part due to driver availability, and there's also been absences on the conductors that's impacted on service provision as well. So at company board, there's been an awful lot of work looking into this, trying to understand why there is spikes and absences, how that impacts on rostering, how we plan around that, but equally how we support the tram company staff through wellbeing packages and so on, making sure that it's a great place to work and that people want to come and that they stay as well. So we improve retention and we speed up recruitment. So there is a whole package of activity in this. The company execs are on with making changes that we've asked them to get on with. But what we'd appreciate is the challenge and scrutiny that comes from an internal audit opinion on testing whether that is appropriate and whether it's been implemented as we'd expect. So it's very much aimed at addressing some of the issues that you'll have seen on a day-to-day basis over the last couple of months.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We had a bit of a chat earlier and got assurance there were no systems upgrades you thought you needed to cover, and you're happy that you'd done the overview of trams, and you'd covered treasury management plenty of times, and that you were happy you'd covered assurance mapping and risk management enough. So just a couple of things. Education providers and the systems around them, whether that's one to think about and put in the mix. That has been some issues, is one, and the other one is the thorny issue we've had for a number of years is whether there's sufficient officer capacity to do everything you need to do, given that you still look every time you expand your officer capacity a bit, your responsibilities about double. So you still feel like you're chasing your tails in terms of having enough officers to actually do all the work you need to do. So, I mean, Gareth might have a view on the second one of those, and the education provider one is one for either of you.
So if I take the second issue first. So there are a number of independent pieces of work that will support the answering some of the questions around capacity. So just to make the committee aware, we commissioned the Local Government Association to undertake a capacity and capability review, looking at a comparative analysis of headcount skills within the South Yorkshire Combined Authority compared to peer combined authorities across the country. That work involved lots of outreach to officers within this organisation, but also colleagues in local authorities and partner institutions across the region. And then that has compared against two of our nearest comparators, which is West Yorkshire and Liverpool, just to get a sense of how we stack up. That work is largely complete, and we expect the report by the end of the month. So that will really inform some of those questions. The second piece of work is a piece of work undertaken by PwC on behalf of UK government around our readiness to accept new integrated settlement flexibility. So I think we've talked to committee before that the way in which government funds the Combined Authority from April, forthcoming financial year, very much changes. So we move away from a fragmented system of individual grants into a much more coherent approach through this notion that is referred to as integrated settlement that confers lots of flexibility to us. But in managing that flexibility, it demands different things from the organisation, different skills, different systems, process, governance and the like. So PwC assessed the combined authority here against a set of prescribed criteria that were agreed with government about what good looks like in terms of our ability to make best use of these flexibilities. And that's a process that again has been performed against all the combined authorities receiving this new funding model. So that report will be published by UK government. It's currently with ministers at Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government for final sign-off. And again, I think that will sit alongside the Local Government Association report and really give a sort of objective, independent assessment about whether we've got enough people, whether we've got all the right capabilities. And I think that hopefully, when we stitch all that together, Dave, that should help inform that view about whether we've got that right.
Do you want me to come in? Can I just come in on the education provider point and then pick up on my questions? So we looked at kind of the reporting framework this year and looking at where what data comes in and how that's assessed. What we can look at is whether there's any areas we can assist in future years, maybe potentially looking at some more of the in-house tests and schedules that team does. So we'll add that to the list for kind of discussion with management.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Chair. I just support what Councillor Levery said earlier about the well-being and the absence management. I think those are so interlinked, especially with the problems that we've had with drivers and conductors, which is what we picked up in Transport and Risk Working Group. We might be better doing those as one rather than doing two and coming back to them later. Just do it all in one go. And the only other point I was going to raise was, do we think we've adequately covered fraud in the plan for the year ahead? Dave's picked up the point about contractual fraud. We've also seen revenue fraud as well. And I think, are we doing procurement this year, if I remember right? So we'll pick up some of the procurement fraud there too. Yeah, so that was my question. Fraud, if you're happy that we've covered that enough. Thank you.
So yeah, exactly the same. So this, I apologies, I didn't say in kind of the foundation of this plan was input from SIFTL board. So these 5 are directly where they've kind of said we would like kind of assurance in those areas. But there is a link, and when we kind of come to scope and looking at the areas, we probably will put them together. In terms of fraud, we did a number of pieces this year, and there was nothing from the risk register and external that we thought would be on the kind of the start of the 10 list of 26, 27. However, let me take that away and see whether there are any areas that we think with management that would be useful to have a look at, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just to pick up Dave's point about capacity, I think, if I remember the drivers right from the risk report, that's the biggest single driver of risk, isn't it? Is it 68, something like that? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. The health and safety SIFTL this year that you're looking at, I had a quick look back about incidents. Now we had in the July report we had 135 in Q1 and 154 in Q2. This report we've had just a report in October, which is 139 in 1 month. Now, are we looking at the incidents? Because that is a significant increase compared with earlier on in the year. Thank you.
Yeah, we will be looking at incidents and we'll be able to feed back to the March meeting. Yeah.
Nothing further? Thank you very much. I'll accept that report. And at this stage we should be breaking for lunch, but I think we'll just roll on as we race through those items. So Steve, if you would.
Chair, Okay, I think there's a couple more internal audit reports.
Oh, sorry,
If
go
that's
on.
okay. No, it's fine.
Okay.
So I'm just scrolling down in the pack now. So our next report, so that's the progress report. So the next report is GDPR report. So on page, sorry, there's like a subset
Sorry,
of
I
our
thought
reports.
Yes, okay.
So the GDPR report is on the the overall summary is on page 63 of the pack. So on page 3 of our report. So this one was looking at the the data protection framework. And we identified that there was an information asset register in place and a clear approach to consent and data breaches. We identified 2 medium and 3 low priority actions. The first medium on the top of that page 3 is in relation to the information asset register. We'd identified a couple of instances, I think 6 instances, where some of the details were missing from that register. And then the second medium was in relation to the record retention and management standards. So the standard was in place. We just identified that there was no kind of central record in place to make sure that there was compliance with that. The other 3 lows are all kind of in the recording information space to make sure, kind of to improve record keeping there. But I'll just pause there and take any questions if committee has any on that one.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the report. In terms of the training, page 63, there's some quite large gaps there in the refresher training. I've got a couple of questions. One was, why have we graded that low? Because to me, if someone's not got the up-to-date knowledge that they need to do the job, aren't we at risk, especially if there've been legislation changes in the meantime? I don't think, and we've got KPMG now, but I don't think either you or KPMG would be happy if your accountants were 21 months out of date on the standards. So why do we degrade it low?
So we identified 2 instances where there was staff who hadn't kept the training up to date. I think the rationale for it being low is that it's refresher training and not kind of initial training, so they have had training in regards to kind of data protection. Also, you mentioned in terms of whether there's been any legislative updates. There hasn't really been any in the last 12 months. I would say they're significant, and that'll be kind of the reason why we put it as low.
And then just following it up, if I've understood the detailed findings, I think one of the reasons that was given for the problem was that the individual's name may have appeared in the HR register different to what they were actually called. Now that got me worried a bit about the overall control issues for the HR system, and unless it was someone who got married and the name had not been updated, how do we square that with the payroll reporting if we've got somebody using 2 different names?
So on payroll, we work off payroll references. So everyone will have a unique...
So it's not integrated from HR?
No.
Fine. No. Okay, I understand that. Although there may be a problem further down if somebody did a reconciliation of the 2, if HMRC do a reconciliation of the 2 and say, why are they called different names? So that's the reason why they've got the wrong name, is it?
I think when we did the payroll report, I have to apologise, I'm not sure when we did that, but we did a payroll report, we did data analytics, and we did do that data analytics. I will dig out when we did that. It could just be the timing issue, like you say, in terms of the name, but we can have a look back and see the reason for that.
Okay, that'll be fine. But the answer about we're not interfacing the 2 together leaves me a little bit more.
Yeah. So as part of our integrated settlement improvement plan, one of the fundamental things we would like to do is implement an ERP that actually would allow us to do this. Right now we have standalone systems that require quite a lot of manual intervention, which is a risk in itself, but I think we're comfortable with controls around payroll.
Claire, you're itching to come in and tell me off.
Just to give a little bit of further assurance, obviously just to assure members that there is a process in place for following up for non-completers. There's a regular report that ELB receive that then is kind of disseminated through directorates to follow up on people that have not completed. And there are automated reminders that come from the system in a timely manner. So that is tracked regularly. I think there was just that issue that was picked up about the inconsistency with the names. If the name's not right, they might not have been on the list to chase up, but we're looking at that. So.
Chair, if I may as well, just to follow up what Claire has just referenced, I've just got the latest mandatory training chaser email, which came in on the 12th of January. So overall compliance with GDPR training was around 90% for the organisation, and within my space where lots of this is really important, it was at 95%, and in our police and reform function where again we're handling lots of sensitive data, it was 100%. So it is pretty good across the patch, and we are quite hot on chasing this down.
I think the thing to know is to get it to 100%, obviously you've got to take into account people that are maybe on long-term sick or maternity leave or something like that. So there's always a bit of a difference.
Okay. Ashid.
Yeah, happy for me to move on to the next report.
Sorry, I just got one more question.
Sorry, take on.
Just a minor one on page 63. It might be my reading of the report. Can you clarify? You say the MCA have a DPA and DSA register in place, and then you say which intends to list all third parties which require DPAs or DSAs. Do you mean it does, or it will do at one stage in the future? It intends to reads to me as a future thing. It will do, but I think reading the rest of the report, you're actually saying it does, and it's just that me slightly misunderstanding the word.
Yeah, we've obviously sampled 10 to make sure they're on there. It may just be that word that's kind of throwing it off, I think, for intends, because it should include all.
So we think it does include all, and your testing has not found, admittedly on a sample, has not found any that are missing.
Yeah.
Okay. So its purpose is to list all or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
I just wanted to acknowledge that there's a couple of the management actions that have already been due, and just to show that there's progress on those. So there was the one around the training that we've looked at there, and some assurance on that. The record number 3, the record retention management standard document to be reviewed and updated. We were making some updates related to policing and reform, I think, on that one. That has been done. However, we now need to make another update because we've made a decision around retention on Microsoft Teams chats and emails. So we need to just make that further update, which is in progress at the minute. I think that was the only other. Oh no, there was another one. Columns in the information right request log. It's the management action number 5. That's complete.
Thank you, Chair. And just following up, Claire, on that, on page 72, there's reference to a document that was in draft and is expected to be signed off by the end of November. Has that one been done as well? That's the same one, is it? Thank you.
Sorry for my confusion. Apologise for my confusion. There's a list of appendices and different items, and I wasn't quite tracking which was which.
No problem. Okay, so I'll come on to our last report, so I'm not delaying any time in. So our last one is Financial Management Treasury. So on page 81 and 82 of the pack probably gives the best overview for committee. So this one came out with reasonable assurance. We were looking at the kind of the policies in place, training, reporting, and with reasonable assurance there was 1 medium and 3 lows. The medium kind of high level overview is on page 82, was in relation to 3 investment cases where we didn't see that documented approval. For those 3 we did see that, you know, it may have been verbal and there was reasons why but that was for 3 there. And then the other 3 lows are again to do with documenting things, having, you know, procedures in place at a bit more granular level, just to strengthen the kind of the documentation and recording of reconciliations and reports. But overall, a positive opinion, and I'll just pause there if committee has any questions on this report.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of the total value of the transactions that hadn't been authorised, do you know roughly how much that was, please?
I don't to hand, but I could find them, but to bring
That'd
back
be
to
helpful,
committee
just
if
get
that's okay.
feel
Yeah,
for what the scale
Yeah.
of it is.
I could find that out. It would be in the tens of millions. I can add some extra. I mean, basically, I think there were 3 that were found. I think 2 of them related to when Sheffield Council did the treasury management activity, and basically there was a different scheme of delegation back then, but I think the approval was by Simca Finance. So basically, we found most, because it was quite a big sample, we found most of the approvals, but to an extent it depended on who was approving that particular deal. And we just couldn't find certain emails relating to 2 of the investments that took place. So it doesn't mean that there wasn't approval. It's just that going back 2 or 3 years, trying to find approval documents was somewhat difficult. There was one instance where it was since Simca have taken over the treasury management, and that was an instance where there'd been a verbal discussion that an investment would be placed. The investment was placed, and then an email was sent about a day after or 2 days after saying, as discussed, I have placed the investment. So basically the problem there was there wasn't actually a documented approval before the investment was placed, even though it had been verbally approved. So going forward, we'll ensure that any investment or loan that is taken out will have documented approval before the deal is done.
Thank you. And then just for clarification then on the detail, in page 82, it says one of the reasons why the approval wasn't there was that the approval was no longer being part of the MCA. I didn't quite understand what that referred to. Is that partly around?
I think that's basically because the individual that approved that deal was no longer part of the MCA, and we couldn't find the documentation because they were no longer part of the MCA. We couldn't find the documentation
Exactly.
They
that
were
related to that.
I think they mean they left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think someone had approved a deal, but they've left the MCA now, and we couldn't find the documentation that related to that approval.
Is that because it would have been in their emails?
Potentially, yes.
Right. Okay. Do we not keep emails for people who've left?
I think part of the issue is that it's going back quite a bit in time. So it's up to 3 years ago. So we need to check email retention records, but we've not been able to get into the account to find it. I think there's something team and I have talked about whether we just have a simple sign-off sheet, going back a bit in time, applying a wet signature, or someone runs around printing emails out and collecting them and then sticking them in the file. It's a little 2D. Probably Steve has a better solution for it, but it just solves this issue about us retaining email documentation from people's mailboxes.
Because you can scan, if you do use wet signatures, and Dave will remember, I was a great fan of an ink signature on a transaction document where you can scan it and then you've got it held for the future and just bring it up.
Just point out that since we took over, any emails approving have been they are saved in a folder, so they can be accessed. You know, they're not just lost if someone leaves. They're not just in an email folder. They are actually saved in a folder where they can be accessed in the future.
Thank you.
Unless somebody accidentally deletes them because they've cleared that folder, because they want to clear that folder down. It would be, as you say, much better if there was a system of authorisation that could be tracked through the different things, similar to a purchase order type.
I think there's files in the bucket that we mentioned earlier about the finance system that we've got today was inherited from the passenger transport exec, and I have a phrase that it was acceptable in the 90s, not so much now. And as part of our improvement plan that we've drafted and that PwC have reviewed as part of the integrated settlement, moving towards a modern ERP system similar to the Oracle that the police have implemented. Might not be Oracle, but something that takes us a step up will be certainly helpful and will help us tidy up a lot of processes that are currently clunky and lend themselves to not being able to find the right email at the right time and the like. So this is very much on Owen's personal objectives for next financial year.
Thank you.
That is all our reports. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. This was a meeting that took place in December, and I'll go through what I think are the pertinent things. We had a report from the Deputy Mayor, Glenda Viggers, who reported on governance improvements, engagement activities, and transition of Police and Crime Commissioner powers to the Combined Mayors Authority by 2028. Some initiatives highlighted included money for the violence prevention scheme that we have in South Yorkshire, antisocial behaviour campaigns and rural crime funding, and that was about £440,000. From the force, we had a report that addressed legacy issues and the costs of increased protest activity. So an example given was policing of large events. The Sheffield football derby costs the police authority £117,000. And we've got more of those to come in the next quarter as well. There was, in fact, a notable reduction in serious violence and firearms discharge from 86 in 2020 to 24 last year, which is a good thing, although we still keep seeing them. In terms of recovery plan and budget, we had an outline on the priority-based budgeting savings and efficiencies, although not a final total. We're going to get that in the next meeting, I think. Staff redeployment and redundancies were discussed, with 105 fewer posts since priority-based budgeting began. Budget monitoring shows a forecast 3.4 million underspend for this year, with healthy reserves and balanced operational challenges. Treasury management is done, as you're aware, by Simca, and we get that report here. Internal audit gave us some findings that required substantial improvement, and management has accepted those recommendations, although there was some to and fro about how deep those recommendations were going to go, and we were advised that a lot of those had taken place by the time the meeting was held. The governance review that Simca had and SYP had highlighted the need for clearer arrangements between SYP and Simca, and I think that's already taking place. And we'd got plans for a governance workshop and inclusion of full audit reports in the future papers. So that means that we were getting, from internal audit, we were getting the highlights of the report, but we weren't getting any detail. So whilst we could see that there were recommendations made, we didn't know what the recommendations were, and we didn't know what management response was in the papers that we were getting. We're advised, well, I've insisted that changes for the next meeting. In terms of external audit, we got a draft annual report and updated audit plan. No significant risks identified. Ongoing work on legal provisions and pension obligations are outstanding. We've got the same problem with sign-off this year, and we've got a further meeting to sign off the ISA 260s, and that's on the 17th of February, so we're able to give assurance before it needs filing. In terms of governance and risk, we went through the annual governance action plans and risk management frameworks for both SYP and policing and reform. Key governance issues include case file preparation, which is a long-standing issue, IT service delivery, another long-standing issue, data loss, which you're aware of because we've discussed it here, and SAR compliance, which is a big problem for the police at the moment. The police are looking at their operational risk process at the moment, something that was put in place in 2019, I think, just before I arrived, called organisational infrastructure, and they're looking to see whether that's fit for purpose for the way that a modern force works. And we're due to get an update on that in the next meeting. In terms of IT governance, we felt for the first time in 4 years that we could give assurance that that was in the right place. In fact, there was a cheer around the table when we eventually did that. It has been delayed again, but it's been delayed again because of the need to engage with HR and the unions, because obviously staff are affected once the outcome of the processes were put in place. So go live date for changes to that is July. Anti-fraud and corruption, we had presentations from the force covering financial controls, and assurance was provided on anti-fraud arrangements with increased case detection attributed to improved trust and confidence. So the overall themes of the meeting was that SYP and SIMCA are maintaining strong financial oversight with positive budget forecast and prudent treasury management. In terms of governance, ongoing efforts to clarify and strengthen governance arrangements, especially in light of the upcoming changes to the PCC powers. Internal and external audit are identifying areas for improvement, with management response to recommendations, and they are generally done on time. Risk registers have been refined. Operational challenges, SYP faces pressures from protest activity, event policing and workforce changes, but is as usual showing resilience and adaptability. Happy to take any questions.
Just one observation. On the Derby costs, there's unlikely to be that pressure next year.
Thanks, Paul.
Unless the
From a Wednesday fan, that's great news.
Well, I was going to say, unless the Blades have a collapsing form, in which case just about all the South Yorkshire teams will be in the same division, won't they, unless Doncaster drop and Rotherham drop out where they are.
Yeah, we have to think about this in financial terms from a policing point of view, because the third round of the FA Cup left us with both Sheffield sides at home, which obviously gives an increased cost to the force. And policing, as you know, of these events is outside the stadiums, not inside the stadiums anymore. So the clubs don't pay any.
No, thank you very much. I think at this point, because I have a meeting in Barnsley at 1 o'clock, considering traffic, parking, etc., I'm going to hand over to the Vice Chair, and you might want to consider lunch.
Thank you, Chair. I'll let you back up. I don't even know if A, if lunch is ready yet, and B, if people are ready to eat sandwiches at 11:45, which is might be a little bit early. Shall we try and plough on for another 15 minutes or half an hour and see how far we get to a more normal lunchtime? I'm always happy to have food any time, but I think it's probably a little bit soon. Right. Have you got anything on there that I need to know about? Right. The next item is the risk monitoring report, the January 2026 strategic risk dashboard. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So the committee is asked to note the January 2026 strategic risk dashboard, which provides an updated assessment of the organisation's long-term and cross-cutting risks. So we've now got 9 strategic risks. There were 8 the last time we reported to you. The one new addition relates to the Supertram reliability and reputational impact, which we've already discussed briefly earlier in the meeting. And although mitigation has reduced most of the residual scores, the majority of the strategic risks remain above appetite, and that's due to continuing capacity challenges, financial pressures, and wider external uncertainty. So where they are above appetite, they're being tolerated where there are strong controls or where reduction's not achievable in the short term. One strategic risk has reduced in residual score, the mass transit risk, and that's due to specialist resource now being in place. So we've built on the last report that where we just brought you the strategic risk. So this cycle we've included enhanced analysis that looks at the number of subordinate or child risks associated with each strategic risk, as well as a thematic review of the common risk drivers, which we did provide last time. So together they provide us with an additional kind of lens to triangulate and deepen our understanding of the risk landscape, so we know where our focus needs to be. So risks linked to capacity, financial pressures, uncertainty and change are the most prevalent, and the strategic risks such as insufficient capacity to deliver, the financial health risk and cyber threat have the highest concentration of higher scoring child or subordinate risks. So the dashboard this time also includes level 2 risks grouped across the kind of 4 buckets that we've determined: the public service delivery risks, external change programmes, internal change programmes and compliance and corporate performance. So there's high and medium high risks across all 4 groups, with the most significant concentrations in public service delivery and the compliance and corporate performance. That reflects kind of operational delivery pressures and the demands of the compliance and assurance work. More in the detail, I think there's an additional, an outstanding action for me to just look at consolidating some of the risks on that level 2 around the police budget issues, and members will notice that the business continuity, or I'll highlight to members that the business continuity risk has got the same residual and inherent score. Happy to explain a little bit more about that if you want. So happy to take any feedback on the report and anything you want to see different in the next report, or take any specific questions back to risk owners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my personal view is I think this is one of the best risk reports I've ever seen. In terms of the analysis, those pages 3 to 7, there's very good detail I think you've got there. The way it's analysed, showing the drivers, etc., and the position that you're in after the mitigation, I think that as a summary is excellent for managing the risk. And when you look at annual accounts that companies produce, and a lot of large, really large PLCs, none of them have anything as clear as this to understand what the risk landscape is about. So thank you, will be my view with that. I've got a couple of questions. One is on the new strategic risk that we've put in. And this is trying to make it better actually where I'm coming from on this, but what's the categorisation for a strategic risk? Why do we call something strategic as opposed to, say, operational?
So the definition, I think, is within there. So as on page 102, we talk about strategic risk being defined as cross-cutting or ongoing or longer term, or having an impact on SIMCA and its strategic objectives. So it's those broader, longer term or significantly damaging risks.
Which I understand in terms of the reputational risk, but the question I'd ask for us all to consider is, this risk has been there since the tram came on board in, was it March 24? For 22 months. And it's never appeared before until it's been a problem. So we've missed that. So either it is a strategic risk and we've missed it because it's not been a problem, or question I'd say is this simply an operational risk that, based on our discussion at Transport Risk and Working Group, we're going to solve and it'll disappear?
I think obviously, Paul, you're familiar with the SIFTL risk profile as well.
Yep.
So we look at that in Transport Risk Working Group. And it's kind of reflected in their risk profile. I think this is something that's obviously bubbled up to the attention of the SIMCA Executive Leadership Board due to the recent events. I don't know whether Gareth wants to say any more on that.
And I do understand that in terms of an escalation. This is one of those items, whichever it needed escalating, was one that needed escalating. when it came to a problem. But it's just his point about, have we been blind to this risk? Because I'd add to it and say there's other risks we need to have on that. But Gareth, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a really good challenge, because as you were talking, I was thinking about a whole bunch of other things that, if they went drastically wrong, would end up in this space. And I think what we've always been really keen to do is have that real escalation route from what could be a relatively benign operational risk that, if a combination of factors all begin to point in a certain way, all of a sudden becomes the thing that we are worried about, and goes from having operational consequence to having real strategic consequence. So in this context, I think we've done the right thing in escalating it through onto the strategic risk register, because it has consequences beyond the operational implications, which are serious enough for us to merit talking to you about it. But those strategic consequences become wider reputational damage around our ability to control and operate a transport network, which is really pertinent ahead of us bringing bus back under public control. But equally, around the strategic case we are making to national government for them to sign off on £500 million worth of investment into Supertram renewals, which is predicated on that improving reliability, which then delivers greater patronage, which supports the commercial sustainability of the tramway network into the future. So I think the really interesting thing on a sort of academic basis that I think Claire and I will have a think about is how we are able to properly tell the story about where what is genuinely an operational risk, if it materialises and it happens in the broader context, has that strategic issue, or becomes a strategic issue for us. Because I think, as you say, there's probably a whole bunch of things that are operational risk focused that are in the deeper elements of the risk register that could become strategic concerns for us. But I think they only become strategic concerns if they crystallise, and if they crystallise in a broader context of things that are happening. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but it's quite interesting.
No, I fully understand what you're saying there, and I think the point you've made about bus franchising is really important. Because when I was thinking about this, I thought, well, this is a operational risk relating to 25 trams. When the authority gets 2,500 buses to deal with as well, that is that increase in magnitude, and that's obviously why there is that strategic risk. So fully behind you on that. I think my concern was, had we been blind to this as a risk committee in not seeing this for 2 years, then this is always there.
I don't think so. I think it's the risk of failure, isn't it? Service failure, and it's always been there. And we knew it was a heightened risk because we were getting to life expiry on the network. And I think this committee's probably had quite a few deep dives on the tram renewal program. So we always knew the risk was there. We knew the risk would increase over time the longer that the assets were approaching redundancy, and that was why that's essentially why we're proceeding with the investment required around the renewal works. I think the bit that Claire and I probably need a little bit of time to think about is how we frame some of those operational risks and the consequence of them crystallising.
I think so, and I think there's also a piece about the horizon scanning, which we do on a fairly regular basis with ELB, but that's probably something. Now we've gone through this process of reviewing and rationalising these, we're probably at a point for the new financial year to sit and do a session on a bit of a horizon scanning, looking at the wider kind of context, the national picture, etc., and what that means for us and what we can start to think about.
Thank you, because I think while you're considering that, I'd come to the conclusion that maybe the risk isn't driver shortage. The big risk is failure to provide the service. Because that's how it manifests itself, isn't it? That you cannot, that the service disruption, and then all the consequences that follow from that in terms of confidence with central government for reinvesting in it. I'd sat down and thought about this, and drivers are just one part of the equation in not being able to provide a service. The other thing I think we need to consider is the supply chain, because there's lots of small pieces of kit like brake blocks, wheel sets, which we've already discussed at Transport and Risk Working Group, carbon brushes for the pantographs, traction motors, all those little things. If they started to fail and we haven't got enough on the shelf, the trams will stop working fairly quickly, and you'll see a degradation in service and disruption. And so my suggestion will be we look at this as service failure with all those drivers, parent and child risks, etc. behind it, rather than just focusing on its driver availability.
I think that might, so we've definitely got those risks, particularly around supply chain stock on the SIFTO risk register. I just wonder if maybe we've got the framing wrong on the strategic risk, Claire, and it's a broader bucket around service delivery and reputational management or something like that. So we'll take that away for a think on, but thank you for the challenges. It's super helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. In reference to, we discussed this at Transport Group, network shrinkage on page 115, and the negotiations you're having with the key operators currently. We discussed the issue of, for example, changes in timetabling. So reducing maybe from the 10-minute service to a 15-minute service is one thing. Reducing at the further out a half-hour service to potentially hourly puts a major risk of loss of patronage. Have we got, bearing in mind the current network, have we got a view on where we will freeze the service and hand it over at franchise? Because at the moment we're working on the basis that we do what we get when it hands over. If that in the next year or two significantly reduces patronage, that's not really feasible. So have we got a view where we're drawing a line and saying, okay, for example, now is a service that we will want to start with, and any reduction in that or any reduction in terms of loss of patronage we won't accept? Thank you.
I think it's a real-time issue that the team are working through. So I think the stated intent, at least over the last few months, has been to protect the current network as best we can, and then to get into a piece of work around what we refer to as network optimization, and that might mean changes, but ultimately a better network that better supports communities and the overall sustainability of the network. There's clearly challenges at the moment that we're working through, and in terms of operator intentions for reducing services. So that becomes a fundamental challenge about, can we afford to pay for lost commercial services and put them onto bus tendered routes that we have to pay for? Or would we be willing to accept the consequences of the reduction in the network ahead of franchising? Now, there are thousands of considerations within that, and I think the team are working that through, and I understand there's a conversation coming up with the leaders about that. So I think we've not, beyond an aspiration to hold on to as much of the network as possible, I don't think we've got all the answers to that, and it's something that would be very live between now and franchising. So sorry if that's a slightly incomplete answer, but it's a real tough one that we're trying to work through.
Yeah, I think the main problem is those more remote communities are at risk of losing the service, and I think from if you're going to have a successful franchise, we have to keep them on board.
Yeah, and I think that's always been a principle about franchising, that we're better able to determine where buses go to we're recipients of essentially where operators are unwilling to run services at the moment, and that's why lots of our our tended services network at the moment is supporting rural communities. It's also serving out of hours routes, so our normal commuter times, running on weekends and the like. So it is backfilling the bits of the network that people, the bus operators don't wish to support at the moment. So I think we're alert to the challenge, and the Mayor's been very clear about how we'd like this to run into the future. It's just getting from where we are today to that point is I suspect going to be quite a bumpy road as we react to things and we start to understand better what we can afford as we get into actually letting contracts and the like.
Do you think we could have this as a standing item going through to franchising, please, so we're up to date with progress?
Yeah, I think we can certainly provide updates. It's probably been a while since we had a bit of a deep dive into franchising as well. I think you probably received a few months back, maybe 6 months ago, Claire, I think we had the franchising director come and provide an update. So given time has passed, we're making really good progress on depot acquisition and the like. It's probably a good time to bring someone back to talk to you in a bit more detail.
Thank you for that. I think we agree. Now, as it gets closer, it feels like a big risk that we ought to be on top of here. So an update every meeting would be useful. Thank you. So Claire's noted that. Anything else? Oh, sorry, Paul.
Thank you, Dave. On page 109, I think it's risk number 19. Just reading across, we've got in the far right-hand corner for one of the actions to be taken to mitigate this risk, major incident plan to be developed. It just set in my mind a query about what are our emergency planning responsibilities and how far have we developed a plan to them. Because when I read that, literally, I thought, well, there isn't an emergency plan, whereas I know that other local authorities have incident rooms set up, senior officers on call, a ready-made plan that goes into action if there is a major incident to be able to deal with it. And this may not be the case, but when I read that, I just thought, there isn't a plan here, there isn't something to go into it. Now, it may be that this authority is not covered by the Civil Contingencies Act, which puts the duty on local authorities to have just that sort of infrastructure in place. It's unfortunate that Rebecca's not here to answer the question, I suppose. But do you know where we are on that?
So it's a very timely question. I think that the answer is slightly, and Claire will provide you with all the detail because, as usual, she's done some fantastic work in this space. But our responsibilities, as they were defined a few years ago, and where our responsibilities might be in a couple of years' time, are likely to look very different. So we've done quite a lot of internal self-reflection on this, and to work out where we think we are, and then to test where we think we probably need to get to. And at that point, I will pass over to Claire.
Yeah, so there's a lot happening in this space at the minute. So at the end of November, Stephen joined my team as Business Continuity and Emergency Resilience Manager. And since then, we've undertaken a gap analysis of where we are to assess our kind of current arrangements. And that culminated in a report on that gap analysis that went to ELB on Tuesday. It had a number of recommendations in there around various things that we need to undertake, things like incident management systems, command structures, that kind of thing. It was a very thorough piece of work, and it was well received by ELB, and we're now taking forward some of those recommendations, which we will update this risk record with, because we've reviewed the scoring on there. I reviewed that with Stephen, because he's a specialist in this area, and we determined that the current controls probably aren't robust enough. But then we left the actions to update after we got the feedback from ELB and the gap analysis was concluded. So we're now taking forward those actions and we'll update the risk action records.
Thank you, that's really helpful. So, does the authority have any emergency planning responsibility at the moment?
Not formally under the Civil Contingencies Act, but like Gareth said, we're anticipating the direction of travel seems to be that we will be category 1, then potentially category 2, then category 1 responder in that space. Yeah.
Bring us within the scope.
Yes.
Right, and then it'll be a matter of how we liaise with the other local authorities as well.
Yeah.
So there's, apologies to add a little bit of flavour, there's two things probably that, or three things that shape this. So I think we're a Cat 2 responder right now, so we don't take the lead on things, but we contribute to. That's increasingly an interesting space given the sort of the profile and the platform that the Mayor has and responsibilities around transport. The second point is that if you look over the hills into Manchester, they have a very different role where they coordinate emergency resilience for Greater Manchester on behalf of all the services. Now, we understand government are quite keen on that model because it does provide a central coordination point. So there may be a requirement for us to move into that space. And I think, Claire, there is an understanding that combined authorities will become Cat 1 responders into the future. So it's likely to change. There is, as you'll probably be aware as well, an intent from government for fire authorities to integrate into combined authorities as well. So somewhere down the track, the fire service likely to, in one shape or another, become more integrated into the combined authority. So we recognise that where we are today is probably not going to be where we need to be into the future, and in fact some of the best practice that where others are already on with, we ought to replicate. So we've got the piece of work now. It came to ELB on Tuesday. We agreed to a number of the recommendations about how we proceed, and we're going to crack on and get that done. So if you're interested in a slightly deeper dive into some of this, now we've done the work, there's been an excellent sort of assessment piece done with some really crystal clear recommendations for us, and we can, if it would be helpful for the committee, we can spend a little bit more time on that.
Yeah, I think in terms of our remit of risk, looking at that's quite important. As you say, taking on board the fire and rescue service, if that happens, as well as the police, then that does put us front and centre of major incidents. And I think it is true that over in Greater Manchester there is a history of whatever it is, the 10 authorities working together. And I know each one of them used to look after, so I think Salford used to look after the fire service or something like that, and Wigan looked after the waste service for the Greater Manchester area. Whereas elsewhere in the country, it's always been very separate to the local authorities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have sort of noting a couple of questions. Page 113 and 115, there are still some actions and things that are blank in the towards the right hand side. We've run out of stamina just at the end of the report to complete right over. So there's, I think, one on page 113 and 3 or 4 or even 5 on page 115 where there are no updates and details on some of the risks. So if we can just look for that for next time, please.
I think that's where the risk owners identified that there are no current actions to be taken, but I'll follow that up.
Yeah, if they can just say nil then, just so we know it's complete. And then just one question from me, which is the health and safety, going back to where I need to be, the health and safety major accident or injury risk 4. We've got the inherent 20 and residual 12. I'm not quibbling with our ratings, but I just worry a bit. I mean, this one actually kills people if we get it wrong, doesn't it? So do we think we're on a track to get that down further to where our risk appetite is? We've got a series of actions in. Do we anticipate this getting it down to where it needs to be? I mean, ultimately, if we're saying there's a risk here, we then end up with a possibility of corporate manslaughter or something, don't we? So, and regardless, and like I said, it kills people. Where are we in terms of getting this risk down even further?
Like you say, there are a number of actions there and there's a lot of work going on. I think with this one we've set a very low appetite for this, and it's a difficult one where people are always going to have accidents and injuries, I guess. So it's kind of making that balance between the scoring and the target score and being realistic about it.
Maybe it's my reading of it. I read major accident as being more than even that sad one where someone went under a tram the other day. It's one where, you know, something happens and 15 or 20 people are killed or seriously injured, and it's on the, you know, major media thing was how I would decide a major, as opposed to something will always happen to somebody at some stage and we can't mitigate that. Are we happy that we're, you know, go on.
Obviously I'm not a specialist in that area, but if I feed that back to Sean and maybe build something into his future report that kind of directly references this risk, would that be helpful?
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
If you can note that. Okay, thank you very much for that discussion. Annual governance review, Claire again. Well, I thought shall we press on and try and get, because then people have the lunch and go rather than having to hang around for a 10-minute item after lunch, which doesn't seem to be. If it takes too long, we'll stop. I'm hungry already, but let's try and be disciplined and force our way through.
Speak quickly then. So this is item 14, page 117, I think, of the restricted pack. So this just proposes the approach for the annual governance review for 25-26, and the findings of the review will inform the annual governance statement. So members are asked to advise if any additional activity should be considered as part of the review. It's the same approach that we've kind of taken in previous years, with the addition of some of the assurance mapping outcomes to inform it.
Okay, questions please.
Do officers sign off on their plans to attest to the fact that there are procedures in place and they're totally compliant? Because my understanding is we've got processes and procedures in place, and we assume that if they're in place, they work. But does anybody actually say, yeah, and we follow all those and they're effective?
So are you referring to assurance statements?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a piece of work that we need to do as part of our wider accountability arrangements and accountability framework. So there's a bit of a journey we need to go on with that, because people obviously then we need to make sure people have got the right tools, the right training, the right information to be able to do that in the right way. So not at this time, we don't do that, but it's something that we're working towards.
And is that noted somewhere? Because we have in the past had sort of checklists of where we're up to. Have we got that on a list somewhere that we can keep track of progress that we're making?
I wonder, Chair, I've referred several times over the course of the meeting to the improvement plans that we've developed on the back of the integrated settlement self-assessment, and how we're planning on pulling all this together into a composite piece of work is through what we're loosely calling for now a corporate transformation program. And this just reflects, we've got a whole bunch of work we need to do over there. We're still working through the legacy of the integration of the Passenger Transport Exec, the integration of the Police and Crime Commissioner. We've now got forward challenges associated with fire coming down our way. We know we've got individual issues, like we need to improve the finance systems, need to do the same on the HR system. So all this is coming together now into a plan around a program of activity. So I wonder if it would be helpful for the March meeting, if we just come and present this in a bit more detail, because that will, I think, help shape a lot of thinking on issues we talked about today around capacities, capabilities, process changes, but also how that manifests onto the risk register, how we're going to corral our resource and our people to support all of that, and then some of that just will feed the governance improvement plan into the future. So part of that entire piece of work is a bit of a reshaping around accountabilities and accountability frameworks. Assurance statements become a sort of our project within a wider programme of works then. So if we come and tell you what our thinking looks like and then go from there.
So accountability framework explanation for the March meeting then. I'm trying to keep a note of these, so we'll sum them up at the end. Okay. Anything else on? I had one question on this. Or comment on this. There's a comment that the scope of the review is limited to SYMCA and doesn't comment on the Chief Constable's arrangements. Fine. I just wondered whether it was worth adding a paragraph to future reports saying these arrangements are covered and where they're covered, just so that anybody reading it doesn't wonder why we're just not bothering with that. I mean, they are covered somewhere in the Chief Constable's framework, but it'd be useful just to note that down in 2 sentences, please. No. Okay. Right. So nothing further on that. The next item is governance improvement progress update. Sorry?
I think we just done 40, although I may have strayed into number 16.
40. Oh, it's my papers. Sorry, my papers jumped from 14 to 16. So item 15 then. Transport with. Go on.
Thank you, Chair. The main topic of our review was looking at the SIFTL risk register, and there are 76 items on that, of which 19 were new additions this time, and 43 exceed the appetite. Most of our discussion focused on the staffing and driver availability, which we've discussed, and there are actions being taken to increase the training capacity for new drivers, as well as what we've already talked about, the work that's been undertaken to improve overall workforce health. In terms of action items that we managed to close, or perhaps thought we'd closed is a better description, the Hillsborough tram signals, we looked at that. I think we understand very clearly there's a programme now to improve and replace the signal heads. And then this morning, I think we've got further work that we've got into in terms of looking at the signalling system in greater detail, and we'll pick that up going forward. Just to say that we were satisfied with the report that should the signals fail, there are adequate operational procedures in place to enable the trams to continue operating safely. We also looked at some of the other major projects and programmes that are going on within the authority. Customer relationship management system, which is proceeding ahead as we've discussed before, so nothing particular to update on that. Bus franchising also continues on track, as Gareth said. We had a report back on where we were on the major projects such as tram renewal. The positive thing about that is that the market has responded well to the tenders, and that is progressing forward. And there are no risks that have been identified with any of the capital projects that are delivered by our partners, which are mainly the other local authorities. And I think, unless Councillor Levery, you want to add anything to that, those were the main items which we discussed.
Nicola joined because you were interested in the safer roads.
Yes, and
aspect.
very timely. Thank you. Welcome, Nicola. One of the things that we didn't get an opportunity to discuss, but we have got it on our next agenda, is the road safety position.
Did you want me to just give you a minute on that now? Would that be helpful?
That would be fine. If you're
Yes,
happy
thank you
with
very
that,
much.
Chair.
That would be very
Yeah.
helpful.
So thanks, I'm Nicola Marshall, Director of Active Lives and Safer Roads here at SIMCA. So yeah, the Safer Roads Partnership previously sat within one of our local authorities, and it came back into SIMCA about a year ago. And since then we've been working hard to really reinvigorate that partnership. That's comprised of SIMCA, our 4 local authority partners, South Yorkshire Police, South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue and National Highways. They're quite a common structure across England, where lots of authorities have them. So we've worked really hard to reinvigorate that across the partnership. It's now chaired by Kilvinda Viggers, our Deputy Mayor, who's taken on that chair role. One of the things we're doing over the coming months is to work on the governance arrangements. That might be something that we might want to potentially bring back to this committee, and we can talk about at the update, because something that it previously, in its previous guise, it reported into the Transport and Economic Board of the MCA, and obviously the governance of the MCA has changed, and so it needs a sort of home to properly have some elected member oversight and support of. The key thing that we're looking at the moment is developing a new strategic action plan for the work, and that's because the last time we developed a new strategy was in 2022. We had an objective then, which was to halve the number of people killed and seriously injured on our roads by 2030. That was quite a sort of common target taken up by quite a lot of safe roads partnerships across England. We haven't probably made as much progress as we would have wanted, neither have we at a sort of national level. And that's partly why the government came out with a big new safer roads strategy the week before last, which has got some quite ambitious targets to 2035. So what we're doing at the moment is we've got a really well-recognised sort of nationally leading consultancy, Agilicis. We've commissioned them to come in and work with the partnership. And what they're doing is developing a new strategic action plan with us that's based on the safe system approach, which is the internationally recognised approach to reducing the number of people killed and seriously injured on our roads, and it looks across 5 different pillars. And what we'll be doing is working with our local authorities, South Yorkshire Police, Fire and Rescue, on what the interventions could be under each of those pillars, costing out, which ones we're able to afford, how that fits in with our other spending priorities, and then coming back with a sort of plan for approval probably late summer, early autumn of this year.
Thank you very much for that update, Nicola.
Yes, thank you very much, and we look forward to looking into that at our working group, especially on the targets.
Yes.
I think how we came to set ourselves the ambition of 50%, which by the sounds of things is something which was general across the country.
Yes.
And then in particular, how far forward are we on developing plans to achieve that? And do we also understand what are the drivers behind creating, which lead to deaths and serious injuries in the road safety statistics?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can definitely, make sure we come back with that. Great.
Thank you very much. Right, next item, governance improvement plan.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the regular update that we bring forward to committee. At the appendix is the actual update against the actions. Just to preempt, Dave, you'll probably ask me on the TBCs, the first 2 actions on there. So firstly, around the consolidated complaints process, just to assure that there is some activity on this. The long date to be confirmed, the long date would be obviously the bus franchise in September 27, but there's work to do obviously prior to that, and we'd want to address this action before then. A few things that's happening in that space. There are key design decisions taken by bus franchising team around how we're going to handle complaints. I have some dedicated resource coming into my team on information governance and corporate complaints that we'll be working on, and kind of developing the arrangements around this. and there's some dependencies on the work that we're doing around the CRM. So you'll be aware of the CRM, we're moving that platform because of the security arrangements and developing that platform. But further phases of that will be enhancing it so that we can deal with customer feedback, dissatisfaction, complaints in a better way, and use the intelligence and insight from that. So there's a whole programme of work that needs to happen. It's not just simply writing a policy around it, it's the implementation of it.
Thank you. Do you know when we'll have ability to put a target date in there?
A target date for setting the target date?
Yes.
Let me go with, so I'm to recruit, so I would say by the summer meeting, I'll be able to give you a better timeline, a more thorough timeline on this. Yeah?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This year?
This year, yes. Yes, this year, not next year. And then also on the digital strategy, there's a bit of a TBC on there as well. So the digital strategy document went to ELB again on the 13th of January, and again was well received. There was a few suggestions on small amendments on that. There's further work now underway looking at how we resource the implementation of that strategy, because again, it's not just a document, it's something that needs to be implemented. And as Gareth mentioned before, we're scoping out this corporate transformation plan that will be the vehicle to implement some of that. I don't know whether Gareth wants to mention anything further on that.
And just to reiterate points made earlier, so the overall plan is born from some of the self-assessment work we did ahead of receiving the integrated assessment audit that was undertaken by PwC. That's formed an improvement plan. We're now keen to widen this out into all the other corporate change items that we need to do to address some long-standing issues, to make sure we've got capacity in the right places and make sure we've got the capabilities we need for the future. So that plan is going forward to ELB to seek license to move on, and we're on with recruiting a program manager in the interim to help bring some shape to what, as you imagine, is quite a lot of individual work streams that just need to be pulled together in a systematic way.
Same question again. When will we be in a position to actually set ourselves a firm sort of target and know exactly what we're doing?
So as mentioned earlier, I'm more than happy to bring an update on this. I think by March, there is a March committee, isn't there? Yeah. So by that point, we should be in a better space, but I think it will iterate as we begin to properly understand what individual projects need and what reasonable timelines look like. We can put it as a standing item.
Yeah, it's just about the layout and the way the information is put forward. So if we've got a target date, could we have a target date actually in the column, and then a commentary on whether progress we're doing against it, so we know where we are? Because some of these things are long term, some are shorter. Just need a bit of a feel, please.
I'll feed that back to the actual action owners and change the template.
Any further questions? Right. Okay. Item 17, breach of controls, Gareth.
I'm pleased to say we've nothing to report to committee this time.
Thank you. Work plan item 18, Claire.
Thank you again. This is just the regular report to ensure that we keep on track. Just a couple of additional things to note. There's a Treasury Management training session tomorrow for members, if members can attend. And we'll also be shortly rolling out the annual effectiveness questionnaire. So if members could look out for that in this coming month, the outcome of that feeds into the Chair's annual report that goes to the MCA AGM in June. And then additionally, the items that you've mentioned today to be added to the work plan for the next meeting. But if there's anything else that you think that needs to be added, then happy to do that.
Thank you. Just for completeness, I'd got down digital, which Gareth has just mentioned, a report on accountability framework, something on health and safety, something on bus franchising to be a standing item, and emergency planning. So we're adding plenty to our our workload for future meetings. Anybody got anything else that I've forgotten there?
I think from what we discussed last time in December, capital assurance delivery is going into 26, 27, I think. It was in the minutes.
Sorry, say that again, Paul.
Capital assurance, capital delivery assurance.
Yep.
I think we've got that down to do in 26, 27. I know we only got to the end of March.
Okay,
Here,
yeah.
maybe we could we look at it sort of 5 quarters ahead, something like that, rather than past, so we're forward looking instead of backward. Thank you.
That's fine. I'm just conscious that March is always quite a heavy agenda, so if there's potentially other ways that we can work with members on those, so for example the business continuity one, emergency planning, we could maybe set up a short briefing offline or something like that. If members are available, just half an hour or something, can introduce you to Stephen.
Members happy with that suggestion? Yep.
Chair, just before we wrap up, just for the minutes, if it would be possible just to have a brief few minutes with the committee offline, just to update on the investigation that we've mentioned previously into ESOL provision at one of the local colleges, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Right, that's the work plan. Issues for escalation, I don't think there are any. Does anyone have any other business? No. Okay, in which case, just for the record, we very rarely manage to finish this soon, but it is only 6 weeks since the last committee, and two of those were the Christmas break, so we've had a slightly lighter agenda than normal. However, we've made up for this by adding as many items as possible to the future agendas to make them unworkably long. So Claire will have to look at that and make sure we're not here for 2 days for the next meetings. But anyway, thank you very much, everyone. If we can turn the broadcast off now.